I've clicked on mute, but I need to kind of go invisible. I'm sorry, I've just got my phone and it helps me a lot to be able to refer to my notes to stay on track. So you won't be able to see me while I speak, but then I will be delighted to come back. It's great to be in such good company tonight with the other speakers and also everyone joining us across the UK. And I know that there are people in other countries that are also joining us. So welcome, it's great to be with you. And I'm just going to be invisible for a short period. Right, as Ruth said, I'm a Scottish survivor of commercial sexual exploitation. In my late teens, I was exploited through prostitution in London and then trafficked to a prostitution ring in the Middle East. Over the past 25 years, I've had the absolute privilege of helping hundreds of women exit prostitution and rebuild their lives. My own experience was in what was ridiculously termed high-class prostitution, run by an agency that was referred to as the safest in London. And I can tell you that there was nothing high class about getting raped or having bite marks on my face or being asked at gunpoint if my mum knew where I was and if I would like to see her again. The location or the surroundings do not reduce the impact of what is experienced, and we must dismiss the false narrative around women and girls choosing prostitution. Prostitution chooses women and girls, and demand creates prostitution and trafficking. Everyone involved in prostitution must be entitled to the support they need. However, tonight I will be centering women and girls in order to reflect the reality of those most affected by commercial sexual exploitation. As many of you will be aware, experts in this field state that sexual exploitation and sex trafficking in Scotland is at epidemic proportions. Trafficking and pimping is big business, and adult websites also incentivize that and make it easy. They are effectively encouraging violence against women, and for wider society, they perpetuate harmful stereotypes and gender inequality. As Ruth has said, the Scottish Government rightly states, and has done so for 10 years, that prostitution is violence against women and girls. Therefore, we must seek to actively eradicate commercial sexual exploitation, holding perpetrators to account and providing sustainable exit routes for the women and girls whose vulnerabilities are exploited as they're funneled into the dehumanizing system of prostitution. We also need to cut it off at the root through prevention. Otherwise, we're just picking up the pieces of ruined lives, and that is just not good enough. I want to see our government adopt what is usually referred to as the Nordic model or the sex buyer's law, legislation which completely decriminalizes those selling sex and that also provides specific support for them to exit. We need to see our government's policy transformed into a very real and tangible response, where the sex buyers, pimps, traffickers and third-party facilitators who create the demand are criminalised. Traffickers and pimps are willing to take big risks because of the sizable profits, but they also want to reduce risks where they can so that their crimes can carry on uninterrupted. Evidence shows that they will favour operating in countries where the demand is not tackled by the criminal justice system. So currently, here in the UK and here in Scotland, it's good for organised crime. So we need that policy that we've got to be enacted in very real and tangible ways. We need it backed up with end-demand legislation that redirects the criminal focus onto traffickers, pimps, third-party facilitators, and sex buyers. There's a lot of myths that come about when we're talking about adopting a sex buyer law or talking about the Nordic model. Those that support the sex trade want pimps and sex buyers to be legitimised as managers and clients and to present what is abuse as work, even sometimes framing it around human rights. Those describing themselves as independent, empowered sex workers who have chosen this supposed work constitute a minuscule minority of those in the sex trade. When I was running exiting services, we supported on average of 215 women a year. That was just in one borough in London, and I never met one woman who didn't want to get out. We also heard a few weeks ago at our Romanian summit that 83% of Romanian women want to exit prostitution, and that 60% would not describe it as a job or tell someone else to get involved. The reality is that there are nearly always underlying issues that create the conditions of vulnerability. Most women and girls' routes into prostitution have been underlying issues that contribute to a pathway of vulnerability that can include a lack of choice, poverty, childhood sexual abuse, neglect, addiction, or coercive and controlling relationships. This is why we must rid ourselves of the false dichotomy we are continually presented with, that of course sex trafficking is bad, but prostitution is a choice and a job. Both rely on gender inequality and vulnerability. Both are inherently harmful, trapping women and girls in a violent and predatory system. Both are fueled by demand, and often it's the same men paying. And if it is supposedly a job, then it's not one that alleviates poverty, but more often than not, it traps women there, often in debt or under control. So no matter how you got here, no matter what you knew beforehand, whether you were born in Bucharest, Romania, or Dundee, Scotland, the exploitation feels exactly the same, and you should be given all the support you need. We also hear that if we adopt a sex buyers law, that it will be that prostitution will be driven underground. They say it will drive everything underground, but it won't. Prostitution, by its very nature, needs to provide a way to supply the demand to the sex buyer. There's also the myth of making it safer and the myth of the good punter. They say if we adopt this law, it will clear out all the good sex buyers and leave the dangerous ones. It won't. And the myth of the good punter is just that, a myth, often described as irregular. Well, in Ipswich, in England, Steve Wright was a regular, known by many of the women. That didn't stop him murdering 5 of them. They will say they won't be able to vet sex buyers. Well, they can't vet them now. You cannot tell who's going to be violent or kill you. And many women have no say in who the sex buyer is. Once you're in that car or behind that closed door, you're extremely vulnerable to violence and exploitation. Those with a vested interest in the sex industry are organised and loud. But when you look globally and locally at those most affected, they are a minority that should not get to dictate policy. Scottish women and girls have a human right to live a life free from violence and exploitation, and to live in a country where we do not have to resort to survival prostitution or where we're forced through coercive relationships into the harms of the sex trade. I want Scotland to be a progressive country. I want our girls and boys to grow up in a society where we have genuine equality. It's gender inequality that make women and girls vulnerable to sexual exploitation in the first place. And we will never have gender equality while men are able to pay for the use of women's bodies delivered behind the closed door. Pimps, traffickers, third-party website facilitators, and sex buyers are encouraging and enabling what happens behind that closed door. I have listened for over 25 years to women who have experienced being behind that closed door. I was behind that closed door, the door of 5-star hotels, the door of palaces, and the door of diplomat embassies. What's behind that door is entitled men who believe that paying affords them permission to do anything, to rape, to threaten, to instill fear. On many occasions, I wondered if I would even get out from behind that same door. Something must be done, and something can be done. What's fantastic, as we've heard tonight, and as we'll also hear later in the evening, is there are countries where they've implemented this, and we've got a good evidence base that it works and that it also changes mindsets. In conclusion, we need a vision for Scotland, a long-term vision, and a vision that becomes a reality we can be proud of. A reality here in Scotland that rejects women being for sale with the inherent harm that results. A reality that robustly addresses the demand by criminalising pimps, traffickers, website facilitators, and sex buyers. A reality where these websites, who by providing advertising facilitate what in most cases is paid rape, are no longer permitted to operate. This is far from a cost-free business, and that cost is being paid for by the women and exploitation of women and girls. The Scottish Government needs to draw a firm line and robustly act on these realities. I'm so grateful for Ruth and for Rhoda and for Ash and for many others who are taking these issues so seriously. Our government's policy cannot be in word only, however good those words, they need to mean something tangible for those exploited through prostitution and trafficking, where women and girls are provided with resourced and realistic options in order to get out of the sex trade and truly build the lives they would choose for themselves. You can make a difference and have your voice heard by submitting a response to the Scottish Government's current consultation on how to challenge men's demand for prostitution. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll come back now and look forward to hearing from everyone else.